Okay, so I'm going to be making this little tutorial on how to play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And Dungeons & Dragons can be a little intimidating, but I promise it's a lot easier than it seems to be. So I'm just going to start with the very basics, starting with the character sheet. So, and I know you can't see my mouse, but just, I guess, try to follow along with the little text. You have your kind of housekeeping things up here. You have your character name, your class, background, etc. And these things are, again, just bookkeeping. But they also are just like, these things will impact how you interact with other characters and NPCs and things like that. But they shouldn't impact your game overall too much. I mean, you can play as really anything you want to play as, and it isn't going to give any sort of like negative impact unless that's the kind of campaign you're playing. That's really up to your game master. So over here on the left, you can see the sort of gray box with the little boxes inside of it. And these are your base skills, your overarching skills. And these will impact the things that you can do. These are sort of what dictates the class that you're playing as. So different classes have different stats that they're going to want to favor. And the stats also have sort of these substats on the bottom or over here. You'll see that kind of to the right of that. Those are your skills. These dictate things that you can do, and they're sort of your specializations. But just going top to bottom, you have strength, so that dictates how far you can throw things, how strong you are, how well you can, or how proficient you are with armor, certain weapons. But I mean, weapon proficiency can be based on other things as well, but typically it is strength. Next you have dexterity. That's going to be how deft you are, how graceful you are. That's going to be things like, if you see in the little skills box that I mentioned, you have things like dexterity in there. Sleight of hand and stealth. So that's going to be a good skill for like a thief or a rogue, something like that. But that also dictates how fast you are to respond in combat, so to speak. So if you have a higher dexterity, you're going to have a better chance of going first in combat, or rather closer to the first move if you have a lot of people playing. Next you have Constitution. So that's things like how much pain you can endure. That's how much alcohol you can consume without vomiting. And that's also your health. So that's going to be good for characters that are maybe a little flimsier, who don't have the ability to have higher, more strong armor. They're going to want to have a higher constitution so they can have a little bit more leeway to get out of the way of danger. Next you have intelligence, and that's your book smarts. That's going to be good for classes like wizards. And after that you have wisdom, which is slightly different from intelligence. Whereas intelligence is book smarts, wisdom is your life experiences. So someone like a warrior or an elderly man or woman or whatever is going to have more experience than, say, a scholar who's going to have higher intelligence. And wisdom also dictates your passive perception, which is something that is going to come into play when you're doing things like adventuring in the dark, or you're dealing with enemies who maybe have some stealth abilities or are high-level spellcasters who can make themselves unseen. So that's kind of like your reflexes. That's how well you can sense things around you. And finally you have charisma, so that's going to be good for a character like a bard. Charisma, of course, is your ability to persuade people, to deceive people, to convince people, etc. Um, and so when you have your character, you're going to have your proficient stat, and that's going to allow you to pick, or rather, it's going to make you more skilled in your skills that correspond to that stat. But additionally, your class is going to allow you to pick a skill that you are proficient in. They'll usually let you pick 2, and then sometimes when you level up, or if you have like a certain school of, or like subclass, it's different. It has a different name for each class, but your specialization essentially is going to let you pick one maybe as well. So like for clerics, you're going to get to pick things like religion, and you're going to get to pick things like I believe cleric lets you also pick history. Yeah, it lets you pick things like history or religion and things like that. But history is an intelligence stat, whereas clerics are wisdom based, so it doesn't have to necessarily be something that corresponds to your class. This could be anything. I mentioned armor earlier. If you look in the middle gray box, there's the sort of shield shape. That's your armor class. And your armor class is going to be a number that is usually going to be around 20, or 20 or below rather. But it can be higher if you have a magic enhancement, or if you're carrying a shield. That can also increase your armor class, but we're just going to operate on the 20 or below basis. So your armor class is going to dictate what number an enemy has to roll to hit you. So say my armor class is 16. When the enemy is rolling to attack, they're going to have to roll higher than a 16 to bypass my armor. If they roll 16 or below, then it's just going to bounce off my armor. My armor protects me, don't take any damage. And of course, I'm sure there have been exceptions. It's really up to your game master. Dungeons & Dragons is kind of freeform with the way that you can do things, as long as you're following these kind of basic rules. Next, you have your initiative. That's right next to the armor class. And that is, as I think I mentioned earlier, that is going to be how quick you are to attack. So when somebody makes an attack, then everyone has to roll initiative. And that initiative is going to determine who goes first. So if I rolled a 20, and my friends all rolled like 16, 18, and 7, then highest number goes first, and all the enemies are going to also be included in that list of order of attack. And once you get down to the bottom of the list, you just go back up to the top. So your dexterity is going to add a bonus onto the number that you roll when you roll your initiative, but I'll kind of get into bonuses later. But the gist of it is that whatever number you have on each of your stats, like strength, etc., is going to give you a bonus number. And that bonus number can be added on to corresponding skills or things that you do. And that will give you, that shows basically that you are better at that. That's how D&D equates it to real life. And then finally in that gray box you also have your speed. That's how fast you can walk, and that's going to determine also how fast you can run, how far you can jump, how high you can jump, how fast you can swim, how fast you can climb. And it's pretty set for the most part. You typically have humans at 30, and most other humanoids are at 30. And then I believe you have the larger playable races like giants, and they end up getting at like 40. and it's, you know, each enemy, each creature, each monster has its own unique speed, um, and you know that's just gonna determine how like how you move throughout the game, and I'll show more of the sort of map uh, in action later. So that's going to show how your speed corresponds to this. And just to wrap this up, I will show you my character sheet for the character that I played for almost a year. I think it was more than a year, maybe a year and a half, so that you can kind of see this filled out. And I guess last note for the blank one is that this is sort of not relevant, or sorry, rather, you can't see my mouse. Everything on the right here, like personality traits, ideals, bonds, and then you have down here features and traits, equipment, other proficiencies, that's going to be more relevant when you have a digital character sheet. But this is a version that is printable. This is included in the back of every player's handbook, and this is what you would typically do if you're playing like in person, but I don't think many people even do that now. But it's, you know, it's a lot easier to play with the digital one. So here's my character sheet. You can see up here I have my character's name. She was a female cleric, a human, and you can see that I was a multi-class character, which I can also get into that later. But she was level 12, 11 levels were in cleric, and 1 was in wizard. And you can see below that I have my stats. So you can see that each of those has a bonus that's applied to it based on how high that number is. So you can see that my strength was 13. That's pretty average, so I only got a +1 bonus to that. My dexterity and constitution were 14, so that's slightly above average. So I also just got like a +2 to that. I guess my intelligence was also that kind of average. But I was a cleric, and clerics are based on wisdom. So I had most of my points put into wisdom, so I got a +4 to that. And I just dropped charisma because it didn't matter to me, so I had a -1 to that, so I was slightly below average. But you can see here in the middle part, the middle sort of long box with all the skills in it, you can see how each of these sort of interacted with my stats. So you have dexterity, that first stat, so I got a +2 to that because my bonus to dexterity is +2. But then you see that my animal handling was one of my proficient stats. That's a wisdom based stat. And I also picked that as a skill that I was going to be, I think that was one of my skills that I put extra sort of attention into. So you can see that it's a +8. But then if you look down below history and above intimidation, you have insight. And that's just a normal +4, because I didn't put any extra points into that. So it all really just corresponds to the bonus that you get on top of your stats, or rather as a result of your stats. And then over here on the right, you can see all my spells and stuff, but I'll get more into, well, actually this is my equipment. I'll get into that later. That's not quite so relevant right now. But you can see my armor class was 16. So again, anything that was trying to attack me had to roll above 16 to hit me. My initiative +2 because my dexterity was +2. And yeah, this is just, I guess this is just like a really good way to see how this sort of interacts. And additionally, all that stuff I was talking about with it being not as important on a physical copy, this is sort of what you're going to get with a digital one. It's much easier to do this in a digital form because this changes semi-frequently, because you have things like your features, and these are like bonuses that you get based on the things that you do. And I mean, you have to focus on these. You can't just get them randomly, but these can be obtained at minimum once a level. So this changes a lot. And so having to write it down on paper and then erase it or to like add more and then run out of room and then erase what you wrote before. Like that's very tedious, and your paper just ends up looking like garbage at the end. So I think it's just a lot easier to do digital stuff like this. And you can see also here I have my character description, which in the other one I'd have to like write all of that down around here, like in this these 4 boxes on the right. So it's a lot easier to just get to like type all of these out. And so I have, you know, like I have my other notes. These are like little things I wrote while I was in the campaign, and I had my little descriptions of how I felt about my teammates. And yeah, like here's like all my equipment, my spells, and I highly recommend doing this digitally because it's just so much easier, and it's easier to keep track of like how many times you've cast a spell, which is important. Just everything is much easier digitally. But that is going to be the end of this part at least, and I will be making another video to talk about the sort of way you cast spells and attack and your equipment and things like that, and then I'll probably be making another one talking about how you actually play the game and how the map works and things like that. Goodbye.